And now here's how we're going to fundamentally transform our economic system, steal your private property, redistribute your wealth, regardless of how rich you are, and change America. Don't deny it. Come on now, don't deny it, that men and cows are changing the environment. That's right, men and cows. So we got to deal something with mankind and cows. We have to control ourselves. That's right. So progress has to be stopped. We need to regress. This is a primitive ideology, folks. Primitive.
This is where freedom reigns.
If you believe in America, if you believe in the Constitution empowers us. It's a new day. America's back. America's back, and America's going to get strong again. We're going to defend America, and we're going to defend our interests.
Liberty's voice, Levin TV.
Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, and this is Levin TV. All right, let's jump right in. James O'Keefe is a patriot, and he does what 60 Minutes used to do, except from a patriot perspective. Sort of undercover video, catching people telling the truth while their corporations or their unions or whomever lie. So they're clearly a journalistic organization. But they're under investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation because they came into possession of apparently a laptop of Ashley Biden, one of the great Biden family members. And she's had her own issues and so forth. And it turns out they turned it over to law enforcement. They didn't do anything with it. They couldn't verify whose laptop it is. Well, clearly now we know it's legitimate because the FBI is on the case. But here's the problem. Why is the FBI on the case? How is this a federal criminal matter? It's not a federal criminal matter. I don't even know what the potential crime would be at the federal level, let alone the state level. And of course, the media in America love this because they hate O'Keefe, they hate conservatives, they hate any competition of ideas and platforms. And so there was a fascinating interview that he gave exclusively to Hannity last night. I know they gave it exclusively because we asked to have him on radio, actually about an hour before he appeared on Hannity, and they said, we're doing an exclusive, sorry. So we weren't able to get him. Anyway, take a look at this. This is profoundly concerning. What's happening to the FBI, what's happening to this country, the failure of the media to step up. It's like the people who are in this D.C. jail, the D.C. correctional system from January 6th, the abuses that they're taking, how they're being treated. They're not getting the proper medical care. They can't contact their families and so forth. They're being abused. And what do the Democrats think? Nothing. They have no problem with it whatsoever. The media, I remember Phil Bump from the Washington Post. He took a shot at me, among others, for raising concerns about how these people were being treated. And then last week, a federal district judge of long standing, a man I've known a long time, and that's Judge Lamberth, he had the marshals go in there and do a surprise investigation. And they came back and said the conditions are deplorable and that people are being abused. Now, that said, Mr. Bump over there at the Washington Post has never sent me an apology. He's never gotten off his fat ass and gone in and taken a look at that jail himself. He didn't care at all. None of them do. So we're in this alone. The culture is square up against us. That's why we have to fight this culture. Due process, equal protection, basic decency and ethics and so forth do not apply to us, apparently. Do not apply to us. So let's take a look at this, and I'll comment as the clip goes on. Here's James O'Keefe with his lawyer, because there was a pre-dawn raid of his home. And by the way, I made a mistake. It's not the laptop, it's her diary. She kept a diary. Let's take a look at this clip. Go.
On Saturday morning, I acknowledge that, but I woke up to a pre-dawn raid, banging on my door. I went to the door to answer the door, and there were 10 FBI agents with a battering ram, white blinding lights. They turned me around, handcuffed me, and threw me against the hallway. I was partially clothed in front of my neighbors. They confiscated my phone. They raided my apartment. On my phone were many of my reporters' notes, a lot of my sources unrelated to this story, and a lot of confidential donor information to our news organization, Sean. So I've heard the phrase, the process is the punishment. I didn't really understand what that meant until this weekend. And Sean, I wouldn't wish this on any journalist.
Let me go into the issue. like anybody that works in any form of journalism or in the press in any capacity, whether you're a talk show host like me or doing what you do or doing what anybody else does. In the course of doing your work, you have sources, correct? You have whistleblowers. You have people giving you tips all the time. To what extent can you tell us the context under which you were given this diary? I assume you did not take the diary yourself, did you not? Is that correct?
That's correct. I'll speak to that, Sean, if I can. An anonymous source contacted Project Veritas and indicated the source had in its lawful possession a copy of the diary that the source said belonged to Ashley Biden. Project Veritas had no prior contact with the source. The source had a lawyer. The lawyer engaged in negotiations with Veritas's in-house counsel in the resulting written agreement, like so many news organizations do. Veritas, the source again affirmed that it had lawful possession of the source material. In exchange for that, Veritas agreed to pay money for the right to publish the material. As you know, Sean, Veritas never did. It killed the story on the newsroom floor. It went a step further, and it turned the material into local law enforcement. The actions of President Biden's Department of Justice in this case are unprecedented because there's decades of Supreme Court precedent.
James, I've known you for a long time. You had no direct knowledge that what this source was giving you could in any way have been stolen. You were not able to corroborate the authenticity of the diary, and you never ran it. At what point then did you go to law enforcement on your own unsolicited and tell them that you had this in your possession and it might be somebody else's?
Well, Sean, I mean, we get sources come to us all the time. We have thousands of sources come to Project Veritas. The routine nature of journalism to be shown information from a variety of sources. But this is an attack on the First Amendment by the Department of Justice. We didn't publish the story. We couldn't authenticate the story, so our journalists looked into it. We couldn't.
Let's stop here, just to lay it out from a legal perspective. They stole nothing. They acquired information based on the representations of the anonymous source. They made a determination that they could not verify its authenticity. They made a determination that they would not use it. They contact local law enforcement and they turn the diary over to local law enforcement, which obviously calls the FBI. Meanwhile, they were prepared to break into his home because they had one of the battering rams. If he hadn't opened the door, 10 FBI agents, they turn him around. He's half dressed. They handcuff him and throw him up against the wall. Pre-dawn raid. We've seen this a lot now. Not against Democrats, not against Black Lives Matter, Antifa, and so on, but against people who believe as we do. People who think as we do, for the most part. So there was no basis for that kind of treatment. No basis whatsoever. They take his phone with all his journalistic information on it, all his private information on it. He said they went through his home. There was no basis for that either. No support for that sort of thing. There is no criminal, as far as I can tell, predicate, either in the behavior of James O'Keefe or his organization, or among the statutes, the federal statutes, criminal statutes. And so here we have the FBI conducting itself in a way that is frightening. It sounds like, a fascistic or Marxist regime, where the member of the president's family is offended or there's some issue that comes up. And so the FBI, somebody has directed the FBI to conduct itself this way. Somebody has directed the FBI to go after this organization. Now, having served at the Department of Justice, I can tell you it could come from the very top. It can come from the Deputy Attorney General or the Associate Attorney General, mostly either the Attorney General or the Deputy Attorney General. They would be aware of this because of the potential explosive nature of it for the public. It would involve the Criminal Division of the Justice Department, including the Public Integrity Unit, in consultation with the relevant jurisdiction U.S. Attorney's Office. So this would all be coordinated, and then, of course, with the FBI, including the FBI director would know about it, again, for the same reason the Attorney General would know about it, because it's a high-profile case. And I know this, again, because I served as Chief of Staff to an Attorney General. So this is the Biden administration with knowledge at the highest levels, and no doubt tipped off the White House because you saw closely the Department of Justice and the White House work when it came to the parents in Loudoun County and other parts of this country. When that memo was issued, which was an attack on the First Amendment, which was an attack on local authority, and of course an attack on parents. Go.
Not publish the story because we could not authenticate it.
Which, by the way, if you can't authenticate it, then you did the right thing. At what point did you feel a need to bring this to law enforcement? At what point in the process did that happen?
After the decision was made to kill the story and not run it. I got to add one thing, if I could, Sean. You use the S word. It's really important to understand not to buy the premise that the diary's stolen. Nobody.
Well, that was my next
knows
question.
If that's the case.
I have been reading all over the internet, everywhere in between, that she claims it was stolen, but other people claim it might have been left in a former place of residence of hers. Do we have an answer to that question?
We do, but, you know, I think people might look at me and say that I'm crazy for talking about the facts at the level I have already, and so I'm going to respectfully say that's going to come out. It's going to be awfully favorable to James and awfully favorable to his new...
So that means it was left behind. This apparently is a pattern with the Bidens, leaving computers, leaving behind diaries, things of that sort, leaving behind brain cells, you know, that sort of thing. Go.
Well, I think it's awfully interesting that James is the one that brought it to law enforcement's attention. Let me ask this question. What is the alleged crime that they have here?
I don't know. This was
They didn't tell you?
Turned in a year ago. Well, the search warrant has misprison of a felony, accessory after the fact, and transporting material across state lines as the basis for raiding the home of a journalist and seizing his work papers and journalist notes.
I would assume...
Let's stop. Okay. What they're doing there is projecting on top of O'Keefe and his organizations things that they might, and maybe not, charge the first individual in the chain of custody. In other words, they didn't carry anything across state lines. They didn't misappropriate anything. It's very interesting to me when you think about the information that was stolen, the Pentagon Papers and how that was used, when you consider how Woodward and Bernstein to this day are celebrated over Watergate, the government information that they were provided with and so forth. And I go down the list. The New York Times and the Washington Post have made fortunes and reputations for using information. What about the information that was stolen related to Donald Trump's taxes? Remember that appeared in the New York Times? I don't believe the FBI conducted any kind of raid at the New York Times. So this is yet another example, and these are horrendous, extraordinarily dangerous examples of what this country's turning into. And I am very, very disappointed in federal law enforcement. Very disappointed that we don't have people in federal law enforcement that say, from the agent level up, no, I'm not doing this. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to participate in the politicization of our criminal justice system. Go.
Both of you are pretty familiar with Daniel Ellsberg and the Pentagon Papers case and the New York Times obtaining stolen top secret documents that they were publishing. They actually set a precedent in the U.S. Supreme Court in a 6-3 decision that said they had the right to publish it, even though that was stolen material. Do you see some?
It's entirely similar. There's no exception to Mr. O'Keefe and Project Veritas. The right to take the material knowing it was stolen, the right to seek comment, the right to investigate, and ultimately the right to publish. This is outrageous and unprecedented. And journalists everywhere on either side.
Why, if you went to authorities a year ago, if I'm understanding you correctly, why did this come up now? James?
Listen, James, go ahead. I'm sorry, Sean.
I don't know the answer to that, Sean, but this is, they've crossed the bridge here. If they can do this to me, these are about certain principles that are so fundamental, our First Amendment in this country. I'm calling upon all journalists to take a stand against this. A source comes to us with information. I don't even decide to publish it. If they can do this to me, if they can do this to this journalist and raid my home and take my reporter notes, they'll do it to any journalist. This is about something very fundamental.
Let's stop here. When you look at CNN and MSNBC and the people that work at the New York Times and the Washington Post and all the rest of them, they despise James O'Keefe and Project Veritas. They don't view them as journalists. And that's the problem. They despise Fox and OAN and Newsmax. They despise me and conservative talk radio. They are self-righteous. They are narcissistic. They do not embrace the entire notion of the First Amendment and a free press. You see how they barely burp up any words when big tech is censoring people left and right and banning people left and right, including a former president of the United States. For what? So you can see the mentality is there, the American Marxist mentality. And you can see that the FBI has now been perverted. It was used against Trump when he was president of the United States. He didn't use the FBI against anybody. It was used against him while he was the serving president of the United States, while the Department of Justice was under him. And now that he's out of office and the others are out of office, it's going after them through this January 6th committee and going after somebody like James O'Keefe. And the factual record is quite clear. You had no basis for this warrant, and you had no basis for the way he was treated at his home and for ransacking his home. And this can happen to anybody, he's correct. That's why we spoke out so loudly when that memo came out from this Attorney General Merrick Garland, and they had a domestic terrorism hotline. They were using the same domestic terrorism hotline if you wanted to report on a parent who you thought was threatening or something of that sort. And they tell us, don't worry about it. We'll never, we don't treat this like the Patriot Act and so forth. Yeah? Well, that would have given a go-ahead. That would have cleared the way for the FBI to be knocking on the door of parents if somebody said they felt threatened and interviewing them and intimidating them. These are very, very dark times, very frightening times. Go ahead.
This is about something very fundamental in this country. I don't know what direction this country is going in, but journalists everywhere have to rise up because we broke no laws here. They could do it to me, they'll do it to anybody.
Yeah, well, if they do it to one of them, then they will rise up. You remember this guy Acosta, a real clown. He was disrupting presidential press conferences, disrupting them. And there were other CNN reporters there. And remember, they yanked his pass because they said, we have the right to do that. You're disrupting these press conferences. You're kind of monopolizing the time. You're filibustering, not with questions, but with attack comments. And then they go into the district court in Washington, D.C., and every single news organization, Fox and the others, supported CNN and Jim Acosta. You see this? They're 1,000 times worse. Where are all the news organizations? You think CNN and MSNBC are going to come to his defense? You think the New York Times and the Washington Post are going to come to his defense? They're not journalist organizations. They are major corporate organizations now that have taken sides. That's exactly what they are. So we'll keep monitoring this, and as I get additional information, of course, we'll bring it to you. Now, Kyle Rittenhouse. Kyle Rittenhouse was this young man, I believe 17 at the time, when he went to Kenosha. And he went there to try and protect people, to try and protect small business owners and so forth against Antifa and Black Lives Matter during the riots of 2 years ago, where people were getting harmed, people were getting shot, people were getting killed. So he goes there. The background of this kid is a wonderful background. He's very patriotic. He apparently is law-abiding. He never had any other kind of run-in with the police and so forth. And he comes under attack. And he's chased down. And he's hit with a skateboard. Other people have weapons. They're threatening to kill him. And he shoots, I recall, 3 people. 2 of them die, and one of them was on the stand the other day, who he shot in the arm. The prosecution in this case is way overcharged. In fact, this kid shouldn't have been charged at all, but they did. Why? Because of the mob. The mob. The mob intimidates these people. In this case, a Democrat prosecutor, Democrat mayor, and so forth, intimidating them. And so far, the trial has gone awful for the prosecution. Absolutely awful. Their key witness, you're about to hear from, their key witness was one of the people Kyle Rittenhouse shot, but obviously this witness survived. Let's take a listen. Go.
Mr. Grosskreutz, I'm going to show you what has been marked as Exhibit 67. That's a photo of you, yes?
Yes.
Okay. That's Mr. Rittenhouse?
Correct.
Okay. Now, you'd agree your firearm is pointed at Mr. Rittenhouse, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And once your firearm is pointed at Mr. Rittenhouse, that's when he fires his gun. Yes?
No.
Sir, look, I don't want to... Does this look like right now your arm is being shot?
That looks like my bicep being vaporized, yes.
Okay. And it's being vaporized as you're pointing your gun directly at him. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so when you were standing 3 to 5 feet from him with your arms up in the air, he never fired, right?
Correct.
It wasn't until you pointed your gun at him, advanced on him, with your gun, now your hands down, pointed at him, that he fired, right?
Correct.
Now stop right there. That's their key witness. It wasn't until you chased after him and pointed your gun directly at him that he fired, right? Correct. That's self-defense. Kyle Rittenhouse is on the ground. He chases him down, points his gun at him, and Kyle Rittenhouse shoots him in the right bicep. That's what happened. How do we know it? Because he just said that that's correct. Go ahead.
You had...
Now this defense lawyer is good. He stopped so that would sink in. He didn't just jump to the next point, but he wanted it to sink in. Go.
Now you had mentioned that you believe that he was re-racking, I don't know much about guns, but you had mentioned that you believed he was re-racking his gun or something, right?
That is correct, yes.
Now you had said that you were looking for a non-lethal way to end this interaction.
That is correct, yes.
Yet you pulled your gun out and began, I'm going to use the word chase. You began chasing or running after a man who was running away from you, correct?
That is correct.
What he was doing was hunting him down. He wanted to kill him. We later learned that this guy has ties to a communist organization. He was asked about if he was a member. He said, I'm not a member, but he spoke to them. And we've also since learned that he's brought 2 civil suits, one against Kenosha, the town, for $10 million. And in the pleadings, in his motion, his filing, he did not mention that he was armed. That came out in trial too. That you sued the city, but you didn't mention that you're the one that had the gun and that you were armed. Isn't that correct? Yes, that's correct. So this is the witness, the key witness of the prosecution. And they've had a lot of other problems too. The prosecution sat on what was unknown at the time, video that had been taken by an aircraft that was flying above during the outbreak of all this by the FBI. And the defense finally got a hold of it. The prosecution argued it shouldn't be made public. The judge rightly ruled, well, why wouldn't it be public? And he made it public. And when you look at that video, you can see how all of this is unraveling. And you can see that Rittenhouse is running. He's running for cover. And how others were chasing him down and trying to harm him because he had a rifle. And so one person was trying to pull the rifle out of his hands. That's one of the people he shot. Because Rittenhouse, as young as he was and as young as he is, he understood at that point it was shoot or be shot. And that's self-defense. Now, I don't know what this jury's going to do. I don't know any of it. But so far, the judge has had very reasonable rulings, right down the middle, which is what a judge is supposed to do. And where possible, a judge is not supposed to censor or conceal evidence from the public. And by the way, as a side note, this is why so many of the cases involving spies that we catch, spies that have done grave harm to us, don't wind up in the electric chair. Why? Even though they are in fact eligible for the death penalty, the federal death penalty, because the government has decided they don't want so much information released in an open trial. Some can be hidden, but most of it can't, because first and foremost is the right of the individual whose liberty or life is on the line in the courtroom. And that's the way the framers set it up, and I think they set it up properly. So this is where we stand as of now in the Rittenhouse case. And I believe the defense has mentioned or raised with the judge a directed verdict. Now, what's a directed verdict? That means in the case of the defense, what they're saying here, even if you take the prosecution's case in the best light, they can't win. They can't win. And I have to say, based on what I've been reading and following in this case, it is a brutal rejection of what the prosecution has tried here. All of the death codes that they've tried to bring in here, murder codes and provisions, they're just not applicable. But this is what happens when you have a mob that demands mob justice. This is what happens. And that witness, in my view, slammed the door on this case. But we'll see. You never know what a jury's going to do. You know, if you've read American Marxism, there's an entire section on here, an entire chapter on climate change fanaticism. That's what it's called. And in that chapter, you'll read a number of so-called scholars and professors who talk about environmental justice, environmental equity, who talk about how the urbanization of America has been racist, the placement of oil refineries, the placement of highways, the placement of parks, and so forth, all have, if not overt racist motives, have racist overtones. And so we have this whole area now, and this is the goal of critical race theory and so forth. Every aspect of the society is racist. Every aspect of the society is the attack on people who are in the minority, who don't have a say about what goes on in the white dominant society. The oppressed versus the oppressor. Now, Pete Buttigieg and the Biden administration have embraced this in its entirety. They talk about where highways were placed, overpasses, bridges, tunnels, and so forth, that they obviously had race in mind. They were even using highways to divide various types of neighborhoods. And I've said many times, well, where's your evidence that this has not only been done in one or two instances, but was done all over the United States? Where is your evidence for this? They never present it. They never present it. So now, transportation is racist. Just like agriculture is now racist. energy is racist. This is a sick mentality. But here's Buttigieg the other day. Go.
I'm still surprised that some people were surprised when I pointed to the fact that if a highway was built for the purpose of dividing a white and a black neighborhood, or if...
Well, which highways? I'm open to facts. I'm open to history. I'm open to information. Which highways are you talking about? Seriously, I have no idea what highway he's talking about. Who was involved in it? You know, the funny thing here is, if it is funny, who builds these highways? Federal government and the states. Localities don't build highways. So which federal administration was purposely building highways to divide neighborhoods, and which state was purposely building highways to divide neighborhoods? These are tax dollars that are being used. These aren't private dollars. But I'd be very curious to know, but they don't provide us with any of this. Was it done during the Obama administration, the Clinton administration, the Kennedy administration, the Johnson administration, the Truman administration? Well, go. And by the way, Congress too. Congress passes the funding for this. Which Congress was racist? So most of these highways are federal, many are state, but they're not private sector highways. Go ahead.
Constructed such that a bus carrying mostly black and Puerto Rican kids to a beach, or that would have been in New York, was designed too low for it to pass by. But that obviously reflects...
What is he talking about? So buses were designed to prevent blacks and Puerto Ricans from going to the beach? Well, these are public buses. These are public transit. He's talking about New York? Well, other than Giuliani and partly Bloomberg, you haven't had a lot of Republican mayors in New York. Lindsay, although he was really a Democrat, but my point, he would become one later. Who is it? These are left-wing cities. So who built buses that couldn't go under overpasses in order to prevent blacks and Puerto Ricans from going to the beach? Who? I'm serious about this. When did this occur? Go.
That went into those design choices. I don't think we have anything to lose by confronting that simple reality. And I think we have everything to gain by acknowledging it and then dealing with it, which is why the reconnecting communities, that $1 billion, is something.
That's why we hear with the climate change. Look, it's a fact, don't be a denier. And now here's how we're going to fundamentally transform our economic system, steal your private property, redistribute your wealth, regardless of how rich you are, and change America. Don't deny it. Come on now, don't deny it, that men and cows are changing the environment. That's right, men and cows. So we got to deal something with mankind and cows. We have to control ourselves. That's right. So progress has to be stopped. We need to regress. This is a primitive ideology, folks. Primitive. And he hasn't laid out a single fact to support anything that he has said. This is ideological once again. It is ideological. And it is based on the white dominant, white supremacy ideology of critical race theory. Oh, that bridge? Oh, yeah, that was built because of X, Y, Z. So much of this is myth-making, mythology. But let's have the data. If it's worth $1 billion to address, let's have the thick book of details. What bridges? What highways? What communities? Which buses? What are you talking about specifically? I would like to look at it. Go.
To work right away, putting to work.
But that's such a heavy lift. I mean, you have to reconstruct communities.
This is April Ryan, a leftist dressed up as a journalist. Go.
As you said, some of these beltways and interstates and roadways were built before the Civil Rights Act, before the Voting Rights Act, and were meant to be racist. But how do you go about redefining and replanning these roadways and communities that are already settled in? Yeah. Since then.
This is how it goes. So she asks a question. She tells you a lot of this was built before the 1964 Civil Rights Act. A lot of what was built? What exactly are they talking about? What areas? It's like the budget bill. It's all a game. Process. They talk about process. As I say, climate change. Just accept it. Don't be a denier. We're not going to get into the details and so forth, how it's impossible for man to literally change the climate. Doesn't matter. Just buy in. Go.
What's interesting is it's going to vary by community, and we have to listen to the community. Sometimes it really is the case that an overpass went in a certain way that is so harmful that it's got to come down or maybe be put underground.
Listen to this. They want to re-engineer and reconstruct communities. Think about this. The power of the federal government. Re-engineer, reconstruct communities, mandates on vaccines where the Constitution does not give the federal government that kind of power, whether people like it or not, where the OSHA statute does not give it any legal authority to do any of it. It doesn't matter. So Biden announces to the private sector, you go ahead and force these vaccines anyway, in defiance of the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. Just listen to this stuff. We're considering shutting down another pipeline, even though we're having shortages of fuel and the prices are skyrocketing for the average person and everybody else. And it's going to be a tough winter on people, their electricity, oil, and natural gas bills. Propane went up 97%. Who uses propane? The poorest of the poor use propanes. You see propane tanks as you drive across the country because there aren't gas lines to many of these communities, rural areas in particular, or coastal areas in particular where they don't have gas lines too. So just think about everything they think they have the power to do, from the classroom to the border, to the budget, to the economy, to the Supreme Court, to the filibuster rule. Everything's on the table as if we don't have a limited government, we don't have a constitution, as if there's no federalism with states, and it's all based on racism and Marxism and these radical extremist ideologues who are in charge of every one of these departments and administrative agencies. And of course, in the media, who just prodded along. So what are you going to do? And who's going to be in charge? You're going to remake neighborhoods? Ladies and gentlemen, the idea is unbelievable, but the reality is they can't. And in the end, they won't. How much money would it take to remake a city? And who's going to make those decisions? As if they're Xi in communist China. Or Un in North Korea, take that building down. Or the old Hugo Chavez, dead and gone, take that building down, we'll take that bridge, we'll do this, we'll do that. Are you kidding me? These guys do not believe in America. They simply do not believe in America. I have a better idea. Why don't we embrace liberty, private property rights, and capitalism? Why don't we take down every damn barrier to every human being in this country becoming successful, including rejigger our schools and what's taught in the classrooms, embrace success and growth and opportunity, embrace capitalism, embrace all the things that create wealth and prosperity, so people can move from one community to the other if they wish, rather than re-engineer communities as if this is some kind of Marxist or fascistic administration. And more it sure is, isn't it? All right, folks, I'll see you next time on Levin TV.